So we've got a little bit of time on our hands and we've wanted to do a video on knots. 25 years at sea and tree surgery, being a rigger, stuff like that. I've got a few opinions on them. So it doesn't need to be complicated. You only need a handful of basics, and from there, sort of the rest of it you can build on. So I just want to cover a couple of things in this video, and if someone wants to learn knots, if you've got new crew, maybe you'll see something new even if you're experienced. Hopefully this video's got something for you.
Welcome to Free Range Sailing. For those of you that are new here, I'm Pascal and this is Troy. For the last 4 years and 180 episodes, we've circumnavigated Australia, culminating with a very demanding year refitting our 1969 Australian-built Clansman 30 sloop-rigged yacht and sailing her across the Great Australian Bight.
All right, so a little bit of terminology. I'll keep it short. The working end, all right, the end of the rope that we're working with, and we'll just call this the standing end. We won't worry about what's at the other end. So that's it. They're the two bits that I'll always sort of talk about. Sometimes I might say hitch, sometimes I might say knot, and sometimes I might say bend. Okay, a hitch is when we secure a rope to something. A knot is when you tie a rope just to itself, usually to make a loop or something like that. And a bend is when you tie two ropes together. You don't tie them together, you don't knot them together, you bend a rope to another one. Okay, that's it. All right, that's enough for the old salty, keep the salty sea dogs happy. You know, we've got the right terminology. Let's kick on. For this, we're going to just go through the basics and then expand on the variations that will sort of make what you've learnt a bit more useful, because you just want to understand the principle of it. I don't want to tell people like how to do something. It's a little bit of the why, and then they can figure out a lot of different variations in their own right. And we also want to show them in use. I might get Pascal to do this first one. So a round turn and 2 half hitches. I'm starting with that because any new crew that comes on the boat, get their confidence up with something they can really use. It's a really easy knot to go through with. And if they're going to be, it's a good way to start, like attaching a rope to a bar or something like that, but it's also a really good thing if you're coming into a port or a marina, you want your crew to be able to tie fenders on in a way that's not going to come off, and it's not a clove hitch.
2 round turns, 2 half hitches. This is the first thing I learnt in practice aboard my rule. Here we go. Once around, twice around, over the top of the standing end and through, and then over the top again and through. And that is not going anywhere. Nice, good amount of tail.
All right, so there we saw the lovely Pascal, tying it up. So the important part with the round turn and 2 half hitches is whichever way you go, you're going to be going away from the standing bit of the rope, okay? You've got this working end, the standing end, you're going to be going away from it. When you're doing the half hitches, it wants to come back and over the standing bit of rope, and that. You don't want it to come under and round. Over is what you need, and that's the only important part. Over, and for the second one, make sure it goes over again. You see a lot of people, they confuse it and they do that. That's not 2 round turns and 2 half hitches. That is. Okay, so the advantage of this knot, and there's a few of them, is that it's very, very firm. It doesn't come undone, but like all good knots, you can undo it quite easily. And the most important attribute of this knot is you can pull tension on this. You know, you can sweat rope. You can, if you're pulling this to make it tighter, you can capture what you've got and then make it off and then make it fast. If you want, you can throw as many hitches as you want on there. And it can also be released under pressure, and that's why we've started off with this. It's a really great knot. Easy to tie.
Hitch.
That's it. So that's it. That's our first knot, and the reason why we've started with that, it's easy to tie. I'm calling it a knot, but it's actually a hitch, isn't it? It's easy to tie. You can tie it under load, you can capture load and tie it, you know, brace it and stop it, but also you can undo it under load. That's not something that I can say for the next thing that we're going to go through is the clove hitch. So a clove hitch is just cross the rope, but cross the rope back over itself. Okay, so that's going like that, over itself, and then under. It's almost like a figure eight, isn't it, but flattened. If I went upwards, I'd go like that. That's a clove hitch. We use these mainly if we're hanging ropes up, or sometimes you can use these you know, as a starter if you're tying things off, but they do have a weakness. All right, a clove hitch, if the tension is not constant, they can work themselves undone and loosen. And that's why sometimes you'll see people come in and they'll tie fenders with a clove hitch and walk away. It's all bad. You're going to lose a fender. The only way that that's going to be any good is if you tie your half hitches, and you may as well just done the round turn 2 half hitches. So that's it, a clove hitch. And we'll see Pasky tying one of those. We'll see how she goes on that. It's really, really easy, but it's a good starting knot, and it's a good knot if you just want to tie ropes up, maybe dry them off a rail. I tend to use this a lot, but you really need to have this rope in constant tension. It can't be variable. So later on, if you do a truckie hitch on the other end, that's fine, but you may as well just use 2 round turns and 2 half hitches.
So what I found with tying the clove hitch, which is a really important base hitch to learn so you can learn all those other additions, is just always tie it the same every time. That way I found I've never gotten confused or tied it wrong. So I just always sort of can do it now without looking, which is great. And also when you snug it tight and finish it off, I mean, you can recognise the pattern if you've got it right. It's really obvious if you haven't got it right.
A really important variation on a clove hitch is if you come around and tuck it under like a clove hitch, that's all well and good, but if you do another wrap before you come under, like that, that's called a rolling hitch. Now a rolling hitch has the advantage of whichever one has the 2 bends before it comes under itself, it's very hard to slip it that way. On this one, because this is shiny stainless steel and I haven't dressed it that hard, it's a good non-slip knot. Now we use that, and if I wanted it to go the other way, if I wanted to be able to pull that way and not slip down, I would just do like that. You can do more wraps too if you want to do a camel hitch or something. If you want extra grip, and you can do as many of these hitches this way too if you like. So that little variation on the clove hitch, very, very quick to tie, but it's a very handy one, because if you tie a rolling hitch on a thicker rope, it can't be thinner. If you tie it on a thicker rope, you've got a way of holding that rope. So let's say someone had their fingers jammed in a winch rope or something like that, or for some reason you've got a big winch snare up and you want to put a rope on that and ease the tension, or you don't want to lose your sail but you want to cut that rope to free someone's fingers. Or what we use it for is to use a sacrificial line to attach to our anchor line. You can also use a rolling hitch if you like to tie fenders on. I do actually use those. That is a secure knot, all right? That doesn't come undone. But the best use for that one is a non-slip knot. We've also tied a variation on the rolling hitches along on our lifelines. So here's our lifeline here, and this cord is holding our lee cloths, but I want it to maintain tension. Because I've got a rolling hitch here, I can slide it, and then as soon as tension comes back on it, it holds it there. I can release it pushing it that way, but it's very hard if you're pulling on this to make it move, and that's the strength of a rolling hitch. All of these knots, you want to leave a bit of tail, if you want to know how much tail, bigger than your palm. All right, if it disappears somewhere in your hand, you haven't left enough for slippage, for safety. So always make sure a little bit would stick out the other side of your hand. A quick word about that rolling hitch. Another use for it, if you're out and your anchor snubber breaks and you lose that hook and you don't have one, you can use a rolling hitch on your chain. Okay, you wouldn't. It works really, really well on chain. You probably wouldn't want to use this stuff because there's no stretch in it, but if you've got somewhere on your boat some more 3-strand nylon, it'll make a really, really great snubber. So if you ever lose that chain claw, or you went sailing without it, a rolling hitch can act as a snubber on your chain. It holds it very secure. Really, really great. The other thing about that, because a rolling hitch holds onto chain so well, if you are in a position where your anchor winch dies on you when you're out at sailing, we've got a little boat, we can do it by hand. Maybe you can't. You can actually use a rolling hitch, tie it onto your chain, run these back to a winch like crazy until you've pulled some chain up and then you can't go any further. And then from your other winch you can run another line back here, tie another rolling hitch, take tension on, undo this one and winch up. And using your sheet winches, rolling hitch by rolling hitch, you can actually recover your anchor. I've seen some big cats, like 40 and 50 foot cats, really big heavy chain. Very hard to get up by hand, but with this you can use your winches to actually lift your chain up. It's a good knot to know. It's very handy in a bunch of situations. Once you've learnt it, I'm sure your imagination will find other ways. It's just a non-slip knot. You can put lots of force this way and it won't let go, but you can untie it even after you've loaded it up. So really, it's a great knot to learn. Now there's one more variation on the clove hitch that I want to show you. Really easy. So you start off just like it's a normal clove hitch. Okay, come around, back over the standing end, under itself, and then tuck it back under the first wrap you made like that. And that's what it should look like. That's a constrictor knot. You can use this for a bunch of different things. I use that knot for when I'm making spear gun rubbers. Okay, so you put the bridle in the spear gun rubber. That knot by itself will hold it really well. Once you tie one of these, it doesn't come undone. It will in this big rope on here, but if you use quite fine rope and tie it, it'll hold itself. It's one of the knots that doesn't work undone. You know what else you can use these for? Is if you've got some very strong cord, like some maybe thin Dyneema, you can make a constrictor knot around hoses. If you don't have any hose clamps and it's a real emergency, you can use this thing to actually attach hoses. So again, constrictor knot. If you want a knot that's just never going to come undone, you'll have to cut it off. All right. So it's one of the very few knots that I actually like that you would have to cut off. So it's just a clove hitch. Ready? Back over itself, under, and then go back the other side and tuck it through. The other use for a constrictor knot is before you've actually whipped a rope and before you cut it, okay, particularly with 3-strand rope that you might use for your mooring lines or your anchor. If you don't want to whip it before you cut it, you can just tie a constrictor knot around the end, pull it really tight and then cut it, and then later on you can do your whipping. But that constrictor knot will also hold everything together. Some people just use tape, but you've got to throw that tape in the bin, don't you? It's wasted. Whereas the constrictor knot can just stay under your whipping. Okay, for this variation on the clove hitch, another incredibly useful knot, and I trust this knot with my life. All right, this is a really great knot. It's another variation on the clove hitch, and it's called the Buntline hitch. We use this when we are tying our halyard to the top of the mainsail or any sail. It's got the attribute of it's a tightening knot and it's very low profile. So when you're pulling a sail right up to the top, you don't have like a big loop and a knot that might block in your sheaves and leave the sail loose or whatever like that. It's very secure. You can absolutely trust it. If you're tying on a bosun's chair, again, it's a really nice knot to use. So, what is it? We'll start and we just take a loop out of whatever we want to tie onto, and then we do a clove hitch around the rope itself. Can you see that? So that clove hitch you come back and you just pretend that the rope is a bar, exactly like you tied the other clove hitch. The first one goes away from whatever you're tying to, and then when you finalize it, this last wrap will be tied up against the object that you've tied to, okay, with this particular hitch.
So the really great thing about this Buntline hitch that we use for our halyard is even after sailing and we've pulled really hard on the halyard, I can always get it free, a little bit of working it. We always take the halyard off our sail after we've been sailing and stow it by wrapping it around the lazy jacks here and then securing it down on the horn, and we just found that just prevents any sort of banging of the halyard, which we can't stand, so we always do this after we've been sailing.
I used to use this a lot when I was a dogman, okay, that's someone that hooks up a crane. You always have a control line, like once you've sent it up in the air you want a line that you can control it, but you want one that's secure. You know, you don't want to lose control of that load halfway through the lift, but when you come time to put the lift on the ground you want to get that rope and you want to get to the load again. So I used to tie my Buntline hitch, but I would slip it, okay? I just feed the tail back through the other end. It's still just as secure, but you can release it by pulling the tail. Just on the subject of quick release knots, a Highwayman's hitch. Sometimes when we've gone for a sail, I might have rinsed our lines and I just want to hang them on the lifelines to dry. You can actually do a quick release knot that's very, very simple. If you, where's the end? So there's the working end, there's the standing end. If you make a bight, okay, a loop of rope, put it behind a bar, first one, if you get like the standing end and put it through like that, if that's clear, and then make another bight with the working end and stick it through that loop. When you pull that tight, that there is quite secure. But if you pull this one, it's got the sort of unique trait that it just comes away. You know, most of them you would need to pull that all the way around, whereas something like this can be tied anywhere along the rope, in the middle, whatever, it doesn't matter. One of them will take load and one of them is the lock. Again, when I was lifting loads that would be quite high and then they would stop above my head as a dogman, and this might be like lifting things, masts and stuff like that. If you want a control line that's got a remote release, you can actually use the Highwayman hitch, because it'll just come away all in one pull. Alright, what's next? A bowline. There's a lot of different ways to tie a bowline. The one I'm going to show is it's just really simple for beginners to tie, and also with this method we can go on and it helps tie a few other different knots as well, which is sort of the promise of this video. So let's kick off. Now a bowline, the old cliche is that a rabbit pops up through the hole, goes around a tree and goes back down its hole, and there's your bowline. The thing that's caused the most trouble in my experience with people just learning to tie this knot is actually how to make the hole for the rabbit to pop out of, okay, that initial loop. So if we remember, we've got our working end. The rope that leads to it has to be on top of the standing end when you make it. You just have to twist it so that bit is on top when it comes around, and that's it. The rest of it's really easy, then the rabbit can come up. If you do it the other way, whereas the rope leading to the working end is underneath the standing end, when you do it, that's when the knot just falls apart and people get frustrated. When I'm tying a bowline, when I'm about to make that loop, the working end is in our hands, thumb down towards yourself and across, and twist it so your thumb's going up. This line going to the working end is on top, rabbit comes up around the back of the tree and back down the hole. That is a non-tightening loop, alright, so it's different to the Buntline hitch. this loop will never ever tighten. And people, whenever you want to make a loop on the other end of a rope that, you know, it holds above 70% of the rope strength. Knots, unlike splicers, knots actually weaken your rope. So a good knot like the Bowline preserves quite a bit of the strength, and so that's why people use it. All right, so with all of the new crew that I've sort of instructed over the years, the biggest confusion is when a bowline goes around something, because now everything's backwards and it's coming back to them. Again, making that loop so that the working end is on top usually clarifies things and they'll be fine. And then it's still, again, the rabbit's still coming up through the hole, around the back of that standing end and back down. You're not tying, you know, in that quick flip, but if you're having trouble with someone new on board the boat and they're not getting it, just make sure that they know how to make that initial twist. By learning to tie the bowline like that, not only is it fairly quick, but you can use it in other ways. If you found that way of tying a bowline and you've sort of got it in your muscle memory, you can also use it to tie up a really quick sheet bend. Now, a sheet bend is a way of joining two ropes of different diameters together. So let's say you've got a line that you want to send off to a boat that's come to tow you off because you've lost power and you're washing towards a reef. Time is of the essence. Usually what will happen is the rescue boat will get close enough to throw a skinny heaving line. You know, it'll be a light line that can be thrown well, but it doesn't actually have that much strength. So you'll get this light line land on the boat. You've got your heavy line. Again, the same thing. If you use that bowline method, make the hole, and around the back and down, you've actually tied a sheet bend.
Pretty quick.
Very quick, and you can do it in the dark. All right, you can, you know, because it's going like that, you can do it by feel. And so that's a really handy thing, because the other thing is as long as you've got this end anywhere along that line, anywhere that you can make a loop, you don't need access to another end to tie this. You can just make that loop and tie it on. So the disclaimer is that the thick rope, the thicker of the two, has to be the rabbit when you're using that method to tie a sheet bend. All right, round and done, and you're good to go. The other use for that, and this was back in my tree surgery days, is you would have a climber up a tree and you would have a messenger line come down. He'd use his climbing ropes, but if you had to send tools or chainsaws or things like that up, or whatever, you normally had a messenger line that you could tie it onto. Sometimes we'd also send up heavy ropes for lowering down big limbs. So if you want to send a rope up to someone that's up a mast and they've got their rope hanging down that they went, you know, up on, or they've got a messenger line, again, you can very easily, anywhere along that line, you don't need the end of it, it can be coiled up over there, you can quickly just tie it on and up it goes. They can pull it, and when they get it up there, it just pulls out and then they can go ahead. So passing a line up to a climber up a mast, that's another one. It's that method of tying a bowline. Once you understand that, you can come up with a lot of different ones, all of your own. But the final one is a Truckie's hitch. Okay, some people have a little bit of trouble with what knots to use when you're tying a load down to a car, or for that matter onto a boat. And we like to use a Truckie's hitch or a double purchase knot. There's a couple of ways you can attack it, and I'll show you both. So the traditional way is your rope comes up over the load and then round a bar or some strong point, and then you bring the rope back up and you make a doorway that you're looking through. You reach your hand through that doorway and you grab the rope that's coming from the load and you pull it, and you can drop that now, and you get yourself a nice bite of rope. And the traditional way to do it is to make one loop, pull it through, and another loop like that. And now what you've made is a bit of a pulley, and you're actually, when you're going like that, you're actually 1, 2, 3, you got 3 to 1, so If you can put 40 kilos there, you're actually putting 120 kilos worth of pull. So you can pull it down like that. And the nice thing about those knots is to hold any of the tension that you've gained, you can just pinch that there and hold it really easily. Then throw a bite in behind it and it holds it. And you can put as many of those in as you like. Now these things, like these two loops, are supposed to hold that quite well. But on a boat, on fishing boats particularly that I've been in, on rough weather, the flicking and everything, that can sometimes capsize. It feels pretty firm. So another way that we like to do it, a lot of people will know this, but they might not have seen this second method that I'm going to show you, is the same thing. So make your doorway of rope, reach through it, grab that, drop it. You make your first loop, but instead of making a second loop, you pretend that you're tying a bowline. So again, the rabbit comes up through the hole, round the back and down. Now when you pull on it, that cannot escape. This is really resistant to failure, that knot. It's exactly the same. You pinch, you tie it off, and you've still got it. But this is really secure. And again, just like a bowline, doesn't matter how much tension, how many hundreds of kilos you've put on that, you can always, like a bowline, just break its back, like this, and undo it. So there we go, we're just imagining this is going off to our, it's tied over, it's tying down our load, and now we've got this other end. So the ropes come around another firm point, crossed over, you pull one through, we'll be pulling down on this. And then there, right there, is that technique for how we tied our bowline. And that makes a really great knot. Again, you don't need access to the end, you can tie it anywhere in a line. There's our tension knot, our double purchase knot. So we've got tension in this, but we have to tie it off because if we let it go, it'll just spring back. So put it down. To tie it off, you pinch at the bottom where it's going through the bottom of your bowline that you've tied. You just pinch that off, take a bite of rope, and it's just when you did the round turn and 2 half hitches, you're just doing a half hitch under here, like that. Make sure it's snugged up nicely, and then do 2. It doesn't matter that it's on the bite. There's a lot of different ways to do these double purchase knots, but I use that bowline method. It's quick, you don't need access to the ends, and it's incredibly secure this way. There's other knots that I use, but very, very rarely. They're all the most common ones. And again, I hope you can see, once you get the basic principle of things like the Clove hitch in and of itself is, it's fairly useful, but once you've got that under wraps, you can make some small variations, and you've got access to some really, really handy knots. And the same with that bowline. I think most people know how to tie a bowline, but just thinking outside the box a little bit. When you're tying knots, I always try and tie it so I can tie it with my eyes shut, get that muscle memory going. Because usually, you'll be tying knots around a boat and everything's fine, but sometimes it's not. And you really want to be able to get it right. And you only have to learn a little bit, and then just once you've got that knowledge, it sort of opens up a lot more. And with your imagination, you might be able to think of even more uses for it. Particularly with that rolling hitch, just being able to hang on with a good, firm, non-slip knot, you can use that for a lot of things. Even tightening, a tent on your guy line, if you're a camping person rather than a boaty sort of person.
So, admittedly, I'm not very good at tying knots. It's just I don't have that brain. But practicing them a lot, you get a really good muscle memory and kind of a feel for them. And what I am good at doing is looking at them and going, no, that's not right. That doesn't look right. So I think practicing them as much as you can is really helpful, and then recognizing what a good knot looks like and finishing it off and what do you call it? Neatening it up?
Dressing, yeah.
Dressing it just right. Really helps. And I think if you can try and incorporate knot use as much as you can every day if you're a liveaboard cruiser. So for example, I get a lot of practice of rolling hitches setting up the windscoop every day just to get breeze through the boat and things like that. If you can think of ways to incorporate Clove hitches, rolling hitches, bowlines into every day, then that really helps.
To make this video a little bit more useful, in the description to the video you'll find that we've put timestamps, and that'll take you back to the actual knots if you found a particular one useful, if you want to come back to that video, or if you've got new crew or someone that's sort of struggling with something, maybe they could use it, I don't know. But hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and we'll catch you next week.
If you enjoyed the video, hitting the like button helps to get this video suggested to like-minded people. Thanks in advance and see you next time.